Sarah Henderson never thought she'd face death at her own fence post. The sun beats mercilessly on her bruised body as she hangs there, ropes cutting into her wrists, left to suffer by settlers who want her family's land. Her world shrinks to the metallic taste of blood in her mouth and the dizzy spells that threaten to claim her consciousness. Miles away, Jake Morrison guides his horse across the dusty plains, his own troubles weighing heavy. A struggling single father with barely enough to feed his young son, he's no hero. But when he spots a torn dress fluttering in the wind and meets a pair of desperate eyes, something deep inside him shifts. What could drive a man with so little to risk everything for a stranger? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The yellow deed lay in Sarah Henderson's cedar chest, its crisp corners softened by time and handling. 23 years had passed since her father first unfolded that document on their kitchen table, his calloused fingers trembling with pride. "This here's our future, Sarah girl," he'd said, voice thick with emotion. 3 generations of Hendersons worked themselves to the bone for this piece of paper. At 8 years old, Sarah couldn't grasp the weight of those words. Now, at 31, every crease in that document told a story of sacrifice. Her grandfather had arrived in Montana territory with nothing but a dream and a wagon full of tools. He'd worked other men's land until his hands bled, saving every penny, living on cornmeal and hope. The Henderson ranch grew from those humble beginnings. Sarah's father expanded it acre by acre, season by season. He taught her everything he knew, how to mend fences, birth calves, and read the sky for coming storms. "A rancher's daughter needs to be twice as tough as any man," he'd say, watching her master tasks that made grown hands shake their heads in disbelief. After the fever took both her parents 5 years ago, Sarah shouldered the ranch's burden alone. She kept the books balanced, the cattle healthy, and the fences strong. Neighboring ranchers whispered that a woman couldn't manage such responsibility, but the Henderson ranch's prospering belied their doubts. The water rights were what drew the Clayton brothers' hungry eyes. The creek cutting through Henderson land had sustained 3 generations of cattle, its steady flow a lifeline during drought seasons. Sarah's grandfather had the foresight to secure those rights legally, understanding that water in Montana was worth more than gold. That morning, Sarah stood at her kitchen window, coffee cup warming her hands as dawn painted the mountains gold. A pile of correspondence from the bank sat unopened on her table, another attempt by the Claytons to pressure her through legal channels. Their offers to buy had grown increasingly aggressive, backed by thinly veiled threats. But Sarah Henderson wasn't selling. This land held more than market value. It cradled her family's bones, their dreams, their legacy. Every sunrise painted these pastures in her father's favorite colors. Every evening wind carried her mother's whispered prayers. The very soil seemed to pulse with Henderson blood and determination. As she watched the sun climb higher, Sarah couldn't know that by nightfall her world would shatter. She couldn't know that the Claytons' frustration would finally boil over into violence. She couldn't know that fate was already steering a lonely cowboy and his son toward her path. She only knew what generations of Hendersons had known. This land was worth fighting for. Setting down her coffee cup, Sarah pulled on her work boots and headed out to face another day on the ranch that bore her name, unaware that it would be the last morning of her old life. Jake Morrison's fingers brushed against the small velvet pouch in his shirt pocket, a habit born of 8 years of grief. Inside, Mary's wedding ring lay silent, its modest gold band, worn thin from years of hard work. She'd never wanted anything fancy, his Mary. "Just the promise is enough," she'd said on their wedding day, eyes bright with dreams of their future. "Pa, the chickens are acting funny again," Tommy's voice carried across the dusty yard of their modest homestead. At 8 years old, he was all elbows and knees, with his mother's gentle eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Jake tucked the pouch away and headed toward the chicken coop. "What's troubling them this time, son?" Tommy stood with his hands on his hips, looking every bit the serious rancher. "They won't lay in their boxes. Miss Henrietta's being particularly difficult." He pointed to an old red hen strutting around the yard. A smile tugged at Jake's weathered face. Tommy had named every chicken, just as Mary used to do. Some days the similarities between them caught Jake's breath in his throat. Their cabin sat small against the vast Montana sky, its weathered logs telling stories of better days. Jake had brought Mary here as a bride, full of plans to build a cattle empire. But dreams, like morning frost, had a way of vanishing under harsh sun. The bank loans came due the same year Mary fell ill. Pneumonia, the doctor called it, but Jake knew it was more than that. Mary had always been delicate, like a wildflower trying to bloom in rocky soil. By the time he'd sold most of their cattle to pay for medicine, she was already slipping away. "We'll manage," she'd whispered, squeezing his hand with the last of her strength. "Promise me you'll keep Tommy laughing." Jake had promised. Some days, that promise was the only thing that got him out of bed. He'd taken work where he could. Find it, mending fences, breaking horses, driving cattle for larger ranches, anything to keep food on their table and a roof over Tommy's head. Their supper that evening was simple: beans, cornbread, and the last of their salted pork. Tommy chatted about his day's adventures, his words painting color into their sparse kitchen. Jake listened, treasuring these moments even as worry gnawed at his gut. The work was getting scarcer and winter wasn't far off. "Can you tell me about Mama?" Tommy asked, pushing the last crumbs of cornbread around his plate. It was their nightly ritual, this sharing of memories. Jake's hand found the velvet pouch again. "Your mama loved springtime best. She'd spend hours planting flowers around the cabin, singing while she worked. Said every home needed a touch of beauty. Like my wildflowers?" Tommy gestured to the mason jar on the windowsill, filled with prairie blooms he'd gathered. "Just like those." Jake swallowed hard. "She'd have loved them, son." After Tommy was tucked into bed, Jake sat on their small porch, watching stars pierce the darkening sky. Tomorrow he'd ride out to the Carson spread, hoping they needed help with their roundup. The money wouldn't be much, but it might see them through another month. A lone wolf's howl echoed across the prairie, reminding Jake of their precarious existence out here. He wasn't asking for riches, just enough to give Tommy the chances he deserved, just enough to keep his promise to Mary. The morning would find him in the saddle before dawn, riding across land that belonged to others, carrying the weight of his small family's future. He couldn't know that fate was about to test his character in ways he'd never imagined. Couldn't know that his decision to take the long way past the Henderson ranch would change everything. Jake Morrison wasn't looking for trouble or redemption. He was just trying to survive, one day at a time, in a world that had taken nearly everything from him. But life had other plans, plans that would begin unfolding under the merciless Montana sun. The fence post splintered under Sarah's fingers as she tested its strength, old wood giving way like a broken promise. Third one, this week. The cattle hadn't done this damage. These cuts were too clean, too deliberate. Someone wanted her livestock, wandering onto Clayton land, giving them an excuse for confrontation. "Might want to watch your back, Miss Henderson." Walt Miller, her closest neighbor, had warned her yesterday at the general store. Them Clayton boys been drinking heavy at Mason's saloon, running their mouths about teaching stubborn women their place. Sarah had thanked him for the warning, but didn't let him see her hands trembling as she loaded supplies into her wagon. The Clayton brothers, Richard, Edward, and youngest James, had been a plague on honest ranchers since arriving from Texas 3 years ago. They'd bought up failing homesteads during the drought, using money no one could trace and methods no one dared question. Now they were after her water rights, and the Claytons weren't known for taking no for an answer. Their father had been a notorious land grabber back in Texas, and the sons had learned his methods well. Richard, the eldest, masked his threats with business smiles and legal papers. Edward preferred intimidation, his cold eyes promising violence. But it was James who worried Sarah most. Young, impulsive, with something broken behind his handsome face. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the ground fog when Sarah heard horses approaching. She straightened from her fence-mending, wire cutters clutched tight in her hand. 3 riders emerged from the mist like dark specters. "Well, if it ain't the prettiest fence-mender in all Montana." Richard Clayton's voice dripped false sweetness. He sat his big bay stallion with the ease of a man used to looking down on others, though it seems mighty wasteful, fixing fences that won't be yours much longer. "This is Henderson land." Sarah's voice carried clear and strong across the damp morning air. "And it's staying that way." Edward Clayton spat a stream of tobacco juice onto her side of the fence. "Ain't right. A woman trying to run a spread this size. Liable to hurt yourself." His laugh held no humor. "Better sell while the offer's good." "I believe I made my position clear through my lawyer." Sarah stood her ground, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "The Henderson ranch isn't for sale. Not now, not ever." James Clayton hadn't spoken yet. He sat his horse slightly apart from his brothers, watching Sarah with those unsettling eyes. His fingers drummed restlessly against his saddle horn. "Shame about them cattle of yours," Richard drawled, gesturing toward the broken fence. "Seems they keep wandering onto Clayton land. Course, there's laws about that. Penalties to be paid." "Your men cut my fences." Sarah's accusation rang in the morning stillness. "Just like they poisoned my north well and scattered my winter hay." "Serious." "Who charges, Miss Henderson?" Richard's smile never wavered. "Best be careful with such accusations. Wouldn't want anything unfortunate to happen to a lady living all alone out here." The threat hung in the air like gun smoke. Sarah's fingers tightened on the wire cutters, her only weapon. "You can threaten me all you want," she said, steel in her voice. "But I'm not selling. This land belongs to the Hendersons." "Belonged." James Clayton spoke at last, sliding from his saddle. Past tense. He moved with a predator's grace, boots crunching on gravel. "Time you learned about the present tense, girl." Sarah saw the violence coming in his eyes, but pride kept her from running. Henderson blood didn't run. Her father had taught her that. "James," Richard's voice held a warning, but also anticipation. "Remember what we discussed about proper negotiations?" "Oh, I remember." James was closer now, close enough that Sarah could smell whiskey on his breath. "Sometimes negotiations need a firm hand. Ain't that right, brother?" Edward's laugh was ugly. "Teach her good, little brother. Make sure the lesson sticks." The broken fence post stood witness as James Clayton's hand shot out, faster than Sarah could dodge. Her last thought, before pain exploded across her face, was that she should have heeded Walt Miller's warning. The wire cutters fell from her. Grip, striking stones that had witnessed 3 generations of Henderson determination. But determination alone, Sarah was about to learn, sometimes wasn't enough against raw cruelty and the brutal politics of land and water. The blue calico dress had been her mother's favorite. Sarah had worn it this morning because it made her feel stronger, connected to the woman who'd taught her that femininity and fortitude weren't opposing forces. Now its torn fabric fluttered in the hot wind, each strip a testament to the violence that had shattered her morning. James Clayton's first blow had sent her reeling, but Sarah hadn't gone down easily. She'd fought like her father taught her, dirty and desperate. Her nails had left bloody furrows down James's cheek, and she'd managed to land a solid kick to Edward's knee before they pinned her. "Wildcats got claws," Edward had sneered, pressing her face into the dirt while James bound her wrists with rough rope. "Bet you're regretting that spirit now, ain't you, girl?" Richard Clayton sat his horse and watched, smoking a cigarette with elegant detachment. Only his eyes betrayed his satisfaction as his brothers worked. "Consider this a lesson in market forces, Miss Henderson. When supply is limited—" He gestured to her water rights deed in his hand, stolen from her kitchen. "And demand is high, prices become negotiable." Sarah spat blood and dust. "My father, "Your father's dead," Richard's voice cut like a razor, "and dead men don't own property. Way I see it, you've got until sundown to reconsider our offer, though I suspect a few hours in this heat might adjust your perspective sooner." They'd tied her to the broken fence post, arms wrenched behind her back, feet barely touching the ground. The position made breathing difficult, each shallow gasp sending sparks of pain through her ribs, where James's boots had left their mark. "Don't worry none about your cattle," Edward called back as they mounted up. "We'll make sure they're well, taken care of once they wander over to Clayton land." James lingered, studying his handiwork with those hollow eyes. The scratches on his face had already stopped bleeding. "Shame to waste such pretty property," he said, voice soft enough that his brothers couldn't hear. "Could have done this the easy way." His fingers traced her jaw, and Sarah jerked away despite the agony it caused her shoulders. "Go to hell," she whispered through split lips. His answering smile haunted her as they rode away, disappearing into the heat haze like demons returning to their realm. Sarah waited until their hoofbeats faded before allowing her first tears to fall. The sun climbed higher, turning the morning's cool promise into blistering reality. Sweat and blood mingled on her face, dripping onto what remained of her mother's dress. Flies gathered, drawn by the copper scent of violence. She tried counting seconds, then breaths, anything to keep her mind from the growing pain and the reality of her situation. No one would miss her until at least tomorrow. Walt Miller might remember their conversation and check on her, but he was bedridden with summer fever. Her nearest neighbors were miles away, and most were too afraid of the Claytons to interfere. The rope bit deeper with each small movement, and Sarah's vision swam with black spots. She thought of her father's hands teaching her to tie proper knots, her mother's voice singing old hymns while making preserves, the generations of Hendersons who'd worked this land. Their strength flowed in her blood. But blood was treacherous today, seeping from her wounds and drawing more flies. Time became fluid, measured only by the sun's arc and the changing angle of her shadow on the dusty ground. Sarah Henderson, who'd never needed saving before, found herself praying for some kind of mercy. Not for herself, she was a Henderson. After all, but for the legacy she protected. The land couldn't end like this, lost to men who saw only profit where her family had built a home. Jake's old cavalry canteen swung heavy against his saddle, the water inside still cool from the morning's well draw. He'd filled it out of habit, Mary's voice in his head, reminding him that Montana summers took no prisoners. Now, as his horse picked its way along the Henderson fence line, that routine decision would prove providential. The sight registered in pieces. Torn fabric catching the wind, the unnatural angle of a body against a fence post, clouds of flies rising and settling. His horse sensed it first, ears pricking forward, nostrils flaring at the scent of blood. "Easy, boy," Jake murmured, though his own heart had begun to hammer. He'd seen violence before, every frontier had its share. But this was different. This was calculated cruelty left to bake under a merciless sun. He dismounted 50 yards, out, approaching cautiously. "Miss, can you hear me?" His voice carried across the stillness, causing the figure to stir slightly. As he drew closer, his jaw tightened at the deliberate nature of her bonds, the precision of her punishment. Sarah Henderson's face was nearly unrecognizable through dust and dried blood, but her eyes flickered open at his footsteps. Fear sparked. In them, before recognition slowly dawned. "Morrison," she whispered through cracked lips. "Jake Morrison, don't try to talk." He reached for his knife, careful to telegraph his movements. "I'm going to cut you down. It's going to hurt." Her laugh was a broken thing. "Everything hurts already." Jake's blade made quick work of the ropes, but catching her as her legs gave way proved more challenging. She bit back a cry as circulation returned to her arms, the pain clearly overwhelming. Without hesitation, he reached for his canteen. "Small sips," he cautioned, supporting her head. "Too much too fast will make you sick." Sarah's hands shook too badly to hold the canteen, so Jake helped her drink, noting the careful way she held herself. Ribs injured, maybe broken. His years of breaking horses had taught him to read pain in living things. Clayton's, she managed, between sips. They took the deed. Damn the deed right now. Jake's voice was gentle but firm. We need to get you seen to. Can't go to town. Fear crept back into her voice. They'll be watching. Jake considered their options. What view they had. The nearest doctor was 20 miles away in a town where the Claytons held considerable influence. His own cabin was closer, more isolated, and Tommy was handy with medical supplies. Necessity had taught them both. My place, he decided. We'll figure out the rest after you're patched up. The shadow that crossed her face spoke of pride, warring with necessity. Jake had seen that look in the mirror often enough. Why? She asked, eyes searching his face. You've got troubles enough. Jake thought of Mary, of the promises they'd made about helping others even when they had little to give. He thought of Tommy, who'd need to understand that doing right wasn't always convenient. Because there's some lines decent folks don't cross, he said simply, and leaving a woman to die in the sun crossed all of them. Getting her onto his horse was an exercise in careful movement and stifled pain. Jake ended up mounting behind her, supporting her weight against his chest as they rode. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, but she never made a sound of complaint. The canteen knocked softly against the saddle, nearly empty now, but having served its vital purpose. Jake Morrison, who'd spent years trying to keep his head down and his son fed, felt something shift in his chest, a responsibility taking root, a decision whose consequences would unspool like prairie miles before them. They rode toward his cabin in the lengthening afternoon light, two souls bound together by circumstance and choice, while behind them a broken fence post stood as witness to both mankind's capacity for cruelty and its power to answer that cruelty. With mercy, Tommy's wooden horse stood sentinel on the bedside table, its paint worn smooth by small hands and big dreams. He'd insisted Sarah needed it more than he did right now. Because horses make everything better, Pa always says so. The toy's carved eyes seemed to watch over her as she drifted between consciousness and fever dreams during that first long night. Jake had sent Tommy to gather wildflowers when they first arrived, wanting to spare him the worst of Sarah's injuries. But the boy had shown surprising steadiness when he returned, helping his father heat water and tear strips of precious clean sheets for bandages. Mama showed me how to make willow bark tea, Tommy had said quietly, carefully measuring dried bark into a cup, for when things hurt real bad. His small hands had been sure and gentle, just like Mary's. Sarah stirred now, morning light filtering through the cabin's single window. Her swollen eyes opened to find Tommy perched in a chair nearby, whittling what looked like another horse. You slept through 3 whole stories, he informed her solemnly. Pa says that's good, though. Healing needs lots of sleep. I'm sorry. I missed them. Sarah's voice was rough, but she managed a smile for the boy. Maybe you could tell me another. Tommy brightened, setting aside his whittling. This one's about Thunder. That's my horse there. He pointed to the toy by her bed. Pa carved him for my birthday, but he's magic, 'cause he keeps bad dreams away. Jake appeared in the doorway, carrying a steaming mug of coffee. He'd spent the night in his chair by the fire, alert for any sign of trouble. Son, Miss Henderson needs rest more than stories right now. It's all right, Sarah said softly. The stories help. Something passed between them then. Understanding, gratitude, shared concern for the child's innocence in all this. Jake nodded and set the coffee on the bedside table, next to Thunder, the wooden horse. How about you tell the story while Miss Henderson drinks her coffee, he suggested. Then we need to see to the chickens. Tommy launched into a tale about Thunder's adventures protecting other toys from mountain lions, his imagination transforming the simple wooden horse into a hero. Sarah sipped her coffee carefully, letting the boy's voice wash over her like a healing balm. The cabin was modest but clean, filled with touches that spoke of Jake's efforts to create a home. Handmade curtains, clearly Mary's work, softened the window. Shelves lined one wall, holding books, small whittled animals, and jar after jar of preserved food. A violin case rested in one corner, dust-free despite the instrument's apparent age. "Pa plays sometimes," Tommy explained, following her gaze, "but only when he thinks I'm sleeping. Mama taught him, but he says he's not as good as she was." "Tommy," Jake's gentle warning carried years of shared grief. "Sorry, Pa." The boy ducked his head. "Should I fetch more water for Miss Henderson's washing up?" "That'd be helpful, son." Once Tommy had gone, Sarah shifted carefully against her. Pillows. Every movement brought fresh waves of pain, but her mind was clearer now. "You've raised a remarkable boy." Mary did most of the raising. Jake checked the bandage on her wrist, his touch clinical but gentle. "I'm just trying not to undo her good work." "She'd be proud," Sarah said quietly, "of both of you." His hand stilled for a moment. "The fever's down, but those ribs will take weeks to heal properly. You're welcome to stay as long as needed." "I can't impose." "You can, and you will." His voice was firm. "The Claytons will be watching your place, expecting you to crawl back. Here at least you have time to heal and think." Sarah thought of her ranch, her cattle, everything her family had built. "They took the water rights deed." "I know." Jake sat on the edge of the chair Tommy had vacated. "But they won't file it right away. They'll wait, thinking the threat will break you first." A crash from outside, followed by Tommy's "Sorry, Pa," brought a hint of smile to both their faces. "Thank you," Sarah said simply, "for everything." Jake nodded toward Thunder, the wooden horse. "As my son would say, that's what magic horses are for, helping folks who need it." Tommy burst back in, water sloshing from his bucket, chattering about a rabbit he'd seen. Sarah watched father and son together, their easy affection a stark contrast to the violence of yesterday. Here in this humble cabin, surrounded by small kindnesses and a child's unwavering belief in magic horses, healing seemed possible, not just of body, but of spirit too. The Winchester rifle's stock bore the marks of 3 decades of use, its wood smooth from generations of careful hands. Jake pulled it from its hiding place in the rafters, along with a worn cartridge belt. Sarah watched from her chair on the porch, where she'd graduated to sitting after a week of bed rest. "My father's," Jake explained, beginning the ritual of cleaning that Mary had once teased him about, "carried it in the cavalry, then used it to protect our first homestead. Said a rifle's like a promise. You don't bring it out unless you mean to keep your word." The morning air was cool, heavy with autumn's approach. Tommy had been sent to gather eggs, his cheerful whistling drifting from the direction of the chicken coop. "The Claytons won't stop," Sarah said quietly, watching Jake's hands move over the weapon with practiced care. "Even if we get the deed back, they'll just find another way." "They will." Jake worked oil into the wood, his movements deliberate. "Unless they learn that some prices are too high to pay, I won't have you risking everything for my fight." Sarah's voice carried the strength that was slowly returning to her body. "You have Tommy to think about." Jake paused in his work, looking at her directly. "I've been thinking about Tommy, about what kind of man I want him to become." He resumed cleaning, his voice thoughtful. "Way I see it, a boy learns what's right by watching his father's choices. Mary used to say that silence in the face of wrong was its own kind of lie." Sarah touched her ribs, which had faded from screaming pain to a persistent ache. "I won't be helpless again," she said, more to herself than Jake. "No," he agreed, "you won't." He set the rifle aside and pulled something from his pocket, a small Derringer pistol, barely longer than his palm. "Mary's. She insisted on learning to use it, living out here alone so often while I was working other ranches." Sarah took the weapon carefully, feeling its weight. "I've never time to learn." Jake's voice was gentle but firm. "We'll start with this, work up to the rifle. Small hands can handle a Derringer better at first." The next hours passed in patient instruction. Jake taught her to load and clean the pistol, to understand its limitations and advantages. When Tommy returned with the eggs, he joined them, reciting the safety rules his father had drilled into him. "Never point at anything you don't aim to shoot," Tommy quoted proudly, "and always know what's behind your target." They set up cans along the fence. When Sarah's strength allowed, her first shots went wide, but Jake's steady guidance and Tommy's earnest encouragement gradually improved her aim. By mid-morning, she was hitting more than missing. "The Derringer's a last resort," Jake explained as they cleaned the weapon together. "It won't stop a determined man unless you're close, and you never want to be that close, but it can buy you time, make them think twice. Like thunder does with the mountain lions in my stories," Tommy piped up from where he was collecting the spent shells. Sarah caught Jake's eye over the boy's head, sharing a moment of fond amusement at the child's simple wisdom. These moments had been coming more frequently. Quiet understandings, unspoken appreciation, the gradual weaving of trust between them. "There's more to learn," Jake said as they headed back to the cabin for lunch. "Not just shooting, reading people, sensing trouble before it finds you. The Claytons aren't the only wolves in Montana territory. Pa's real good at that part," Tommy added. "He always knows when someone's fixing to cause trouble at the saloon, even before they start." Sarah raised an eyebrow, and Jake shrugged. "Cavalry teaches you to read men's intentions. Useful skill out here." Over a lunch of cornbread and beans they planned. Jake would teach Sarah everything he knew about self-defense. Not just shooting, but strategy, awareness, the subtle signs that preceded violence. In return, she would help with the cabin's needs, her knowledge of ranching complementing their small homestead's routines. "We'll need to check your ranch soon," Jake said as they cleared the dishes. "Quietly after dark. See what the Claytons have done, what we're dealing with." Sarah nodded, her hand brushing the Derringer where it now rested in her skirt pocket. Its weight was unfamiliar but reassuring, like the growing certainty that she wasn't facing this fight alone. As evening approached, Jake returned the Winchester to its rafter hideaway, but they all knew it wouldn't stay there long. Like the oath it represented, the rifle stood ready, a promise of protection, a commitment to justice, a declaration that some things were worth fighting for. The county property map sprawled across Jake's kitchen table, its creased surface illuminated. By lamplight, Sarah traced the blue line of the creek with her finger, following its path through Henderson land. Walt Miller had brought the map during his first visit since her attack, his weathered face dark with anger at her condition. "Ain't just about water rights anymore," Walt said, jabbing his finger at various parcels. "Look here, every piece the Claytons have bought backs up to a water source. They're trying to control the whole watershed." Jake leaned over the map, his shoulder barely brushing Sarah's. After 2 weeks in close quarters, such casual proximity had become natural. "How many families have they pushed out?" 7 this year alone." Walt's voice was bitter. "Mysterious fires, cattle stampedes, cut fences. Always accidents, mind you. Nothing that'd bring the law down." Sarah studied the pattern of Clayton acquisitions. "They're working their way upstream. My ranch is the last major water rights holder between them and the mountain springs. That's why they won't file your deed yet." Jake mused. "They're waiting to secure the properties north of you first. Complete the chain." Walt shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Judge Preston's been seeing a lot of Clayton money lately. His new house in town ain't exactly what a judge's salary would buy. So even if we had the deed..." Sarah let the thought trail off. "Law's only as straight as the men enforcing it," Jake finished. Tommy appeared from the bedroom where he'd been supposedly sleeping. "I heard voices," he explained, climbing into Sarah's lap as naturally as if he'd been doing it all his life. Sarah's arms went around him automatically, her cheek resting against his tousled hair. The gestures felt as familiar as breathing now. Jake watched them for a moment, something soft passing through his eyes before he returned to business. "We need copies of all legal documents," he said, "anything proving the original Henderson claims. And we need witnesses to what happened." Walt nodded. "Lot of folks are scared, but they're also tired of living under Clayton's shadow. Henderson land's been honest work for 3 generations. That means something out here." The Wilsons might help, Sarah suggested. Emma Wilson was close to my mother, and the Petersons lost grazing land to the Claytons last spring. Build slow, Jake cautioned. Every person we trust is a risk, but also potential strength. Walt, can you feel out the others? Carefully? Already started. Walt tapped the map again. Folks been gathering at my place after sundown. Quiet like, planning. Sarah straightened. I should be there. Not yet. Jake's voice was firm. You're still healing, and the Claytons think you're broken or gone. That's an advantage we keep as long as possible. Tommy stirred in Sarah's lap. Is Miss Sarah in danger, Pa? The adults exchanged glances, measuring truth against innocence. Jake chose his words carefully. Sometimes people have to stand up. To bully's son, like in your stories. But they don't have to stand alone. Like Thunder protecting the other toys, Tommy nodded sagely. He always gets help from his friends. Sarah hugged him tighter, marveling at how this child's simple wisdom could cut through adult complexity. Walt smiled, some of the worry leaving his face. Boys got the right of it, the old rancher said. Claytons are used to picking off folks one by one. Time they learned what happens when people stand together. They spent another hour marking potential allies on the map, plotting safe routes between properties, identifying vulnerable points in the Claytons' expanding empire. Tommy eventually fell asleep in Sarah's lap, his steady breathing a counterpoint to their serious discussion. I'll start reaching out tomorrow, Walt said as he prepared to leave. Carefully, like you said. The Wilsons first, then the Petersons. Sarah walked him to the door, Tommy now cradled in Jake's arms. Thank you, Walt, for everything. Should have checked on you sooner that day. Walt's voice was gruff with regret. Won't make that mistake again. After Walt rode out, Sarah and Jake stood on the porch, watching the moon cast long shadows across the yard. Tommy snuffled in his sleep, burrowing deeper into his father's shoulder. You know, Sarah said softly, when I was tied to that post, I prayed for mercy, not for myself but for the land. She turned to face Jake. Maybe this is how mercy works sometimes, not by ending the fight, but by sending people to fight beside you. Jake shifted Tommy's weight, his free hand finding Sarah's in the darkness. Get some rest. Tomorrow we start building an army. The property map lay open on the table inside, its web of lines and boundaries representing more than just land now. It had become a battle plan, a symbol of community rising against tyranny, a testament to the power of people choosing to stand together against wrong. And in the quiet Montana night, as a family born of crisis planned for war, hope began to feel less like a dream and more like a promise. The herbs hung in neat bundles from the cabin's rafters, each carefully labeled in Mary's flowing script. Sarah stood on tiptoe to gather sage and chamomile, the familiar scents wrapping around her like a mother's embrace. 3 weeks had passed since Jake brought her here, and the simple routines of cabin life had become a different kind of healing. Mama's book says chamomile is for sleep and calm hearts, Tommy informed her, holding up the worn herbal his mother had left behind, and sage is for clearing bad things away. Your mama was a wise woman. Sarah measured the dried leaves into a pot of boiling water. My mother used to say herbs were God's way of helping people help themselves. Jake watched from his chair by the fire, whittling a new toy for Tommy. The quiet domesticity of the scene stirred something in his chest, a warmth he'd thought long buried with Mary. Sarah moved through their kitchen with natural grace, as if she'd always belonged there. The lavender's nearly ready for harvesting, she said, testing the tea's strength, and I found wild yarrow growing near the creek. Good for healing. And fighting infection, Tommy added proudly. Mama's book says so. Sarah smiled, ruffling his hair as she passed. That's right, smart boy. She handed Jake a cup of the steaming tea, their fingers brushing briefly. For your shoulder. I saw you favoring it after chopping wood. He accepted with a nod, touched by her observation of his discomfort. Mary used to notice such things too. Thought I was hiding it better. Can't hide much from women who know their herbs, Sarah teased gently. The easy banter between them was new, but felt as natural as breathing. Tommy climbed into Sarah's lap when she settled in her usual chair, the one that had somehow become hers over the weeks. "Tell us about your mama's garden," he requested, snuggling close. "The one at Henderson Ranch." Sarah's arms tightened around him briefly, remembering. It was beautiful. Every kind of herb you can imagine, plus flowers just for their colors. Papa used to say it was the only place on the ranch that was purely for joy. "We could plant one here," Tommy suggested eagerly, "by the kitchen window where Mama's roses used to grow." Jake's whittling slowed, then stopped. Sarah held her breath, aware they were treading on tender ground. But Jake's voice, when it came, held no pain, only gentle consideration. "Think your mama would like that, son. Sarah could show us how." The simple acceptance in his words of Sarah's place in their lives, of the changes happening in their home, filled the room like sunset light. Tommy beamed, already planning what they'd plant. "Miss Sarah makes everything better, doesn't she?" "Pa?" "Like thunder does, but real." Jake met Sarah's eyes over his son's head. "Yes," he said softly. "She does." Sarah busied herself with the herbs, hoping to hide the color in her cheeks, but her hands trembled slightly as she worked, aware of Jake's gaze following her movements. The evening settled into familiar patterns. Tommy helped Sarah bundle fresh herbs for drying, while Jake prepared a simple supper. The boy's chatter filled the cabin with life, his questions about plants and healing drawing out stories from both adults. "My grandfather used to say a home needs 3 things," Sarah mused as they ate. "Good food, good health, and good hearts. The herbs help with all 3. "And good stories," Tommy insisted. "Don't forget stories." "And good stories," she agreed, sharing a smile with Jake. Later, after Tommy was asleep, they sat on the porch as had become their custom. The night air carried the mingled scents of sage and pine, earth and possibility. "Walt brought news today," Jake said quietly. "The Wilsons and Petersons are with us. Others too. The Claytons don't know it yet, but their power's already starting to crack." Sarah nodded, thinking of the growing network of allies, like the yarrow spreading by the creek. "Looks delicate, but it's stronger than you'd think." "Speaking of strength," Jake turned to face her, his expression serious. "How are the ribs?" "Better. Almost no pain now." She touched her side automatically. Mary's herbs helped." "They're your herbs too now." His voice was low, weighted with meaning. "If you want them to be." The offer hung in the air between them, fragrant as the drying bundles above their heads. Sarah looked at him, this man who had saved more than just her life. "I'd like that," she whispered. Above them, the herbs swayed gently in the evening breeze, witnessing another kind of healing, the kind that happened not in bodies but in hearts long closed to hope. The Henderson brand stood stark against the dead steer's hide, visible even in the pre-dawn gloom. Sarah knelt beside the carcass, her hand hovering over the bullet hole in its skull. The shot had been precise, professional, a message written in blood and gunpowder. "4th one this week," Jake said quietly, his rifle cradled in the crook of his arm. They'd ridden out before sunrise to check the Henderson ranch's back pastures, following reports from Walt's network of sympathetic neighbors. "They're getting bolder." Sarah stood, brushing dust from her skirts. The clothes she'd borrowed from Mary's trunks fit well enough, though Jake sometimes got a strange look in his eyes when he saw her wearing them. "The Claytons want us to know they can reach the herd whenever they choose, and that they're willing to waste good beef to prove it." Jake's jaw tightened. "This isn't ranch business anymore. It's pure spite." They'd left Tommy with Emma Wilson, who'd embraced Sarah like a returned daughter when they'd first approached her family for help. The Wilsons had lost grazing rights to Clayton pressure, but not their dignity or their readiness to stand against. "Wrong. The missing cattle worry me more than the dead ones," Sarah said as they rode along the fence line. 30 head had vanished 3 nights ago, despite Walt's men watching the boundaries. "That many animals don't just disappear without help," Jake nodded grimly. "Someone's working with them, someone who knows the land, the routines." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "When I was in the cavalry, we learned that every outfit had its weak points. Money, grudges, fear, there's always something that makes a man turn." They crested a rise, overlooking the main pasture. Sarah's throat tightened at the sight of her family's ranch. The house stood empty, its windows dark reproach. Weeds had begun to claim the garden where her mother's herbs once grew. But the bones of the place remained strong, waiting. "There," Jake pointed to fresh tracks cutting across the creek bed. "Those aren't ranch horses, too well shod for working stock." Sarah studied the signs with eyes he'd helped sharpen over the past weeks. "They're watching us even now, aren't they?" "Probably." His hand brushed her arm briefly. "Let them watch. Every day you're stronger. Every ally we gather, it all works in our favor." They'd developed an easy rhythm in their reconnaissance. Rides. Jake had taught her to move like a scout, to read the land's stories, to trust her instincts about danger. In return, she'd shared her intimate knowledge of the ranch's hidden places, the secret paths her father had shown her. A dust cloud approached from the east, Walt's boy riding hard. They waited as he reined in, his horse lathered. "Clayton men in town," the young rider reported breathlessly. "Drunk, running their mouths about teaching women and their lapdogs. Permanent lessons." Sarah felt Jake stiffen beside her. The threat was clear. They knew about his help, his involvement. "Tommy?" Jake's voice was controlled, but Sarah heard the fear beneath. "Safe with Ma Wilson," the boy assured him. "She sent extra hands to your place too, just in case." Jake relaxed slightly, but his eyes had turned hard. "They're trying to split our attention, make us choose between defending the ranch and protecting our people." "Then we don't choose," Sarah said firmly. "We adapt." She turned to Walt's son. "Ride to the Petersons. Tell them we're calling in that favor. We need their men tonight." The boy nodded and wheeled his horse, disappearing back into the growing day. Jake raised an eyebrow at Sarah. "You have a plan?" "The Claytons think they're dealing with a broken woman and a lone rancher." Sarah's smile held steel. "Time they learned what happens when you underestimate people with nothing left to lose." They rode back toward the Wilson place, discussing strategy. The missing cattle still weighed on Sarah's mind, but not as heavily as they once might have. Loss had taught her that some things mattered more than property, like the quiet strength of the man beside her, the growing army of neighbors standing against tyranny, and the small boy who called her Miss Sarah with pure love in his voice. Behind them, the dead steer lay as a marker of the Claytons' cruelty. But they'd forgotten something crucial about killing things. Sometimes death fed the roots of resistance, making it grow stronger than before. Sarah touched the derringer in her pocket, then reached across to squeeze Jake's hand. "Whatever comes," she said softly, "we face it together." His fingers tightened around hers, warm and sure as a promise. Above them, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, promising change on the wind. The letter lay in Mary's old writing desk, carefully folded between pages of her herbal book. Sarah found it while gathering recipes for wound poultices, Tommy helping her search through his mother's neat annotations. The paper was aged, the ink faded, but the words remained clear. Jake's declaration of love to Mary, written during their courtship. "Pa wrote Mama lots of letters," Tommy said, recognizing his father's handwriting. "She kept them all in a special box, but this was her favorite. She used to read it when Pa was away working." Sarah started to fold the letter, meaning to return it unread, but Tommy's small hand stopped her. "It's okay. Mama said love letters are meant to be read. They keep hearts warm." With trembling fingers, Sarah read words written in a younger. Jake's hand. "My dearest Mary, I'm not a man of fancy phrases, but I know what's true. You're the morning light after the darkest night, the melody that makes sense of silence. When I think of home, I see your smile." "Miss Sarah?" Tommy's voice drew her from the letter's spell. "Are you crying?" She touched her cheek, finding it damp. "Happy tears, sweetheart. Your father has a beautiful way with words. He doesn't write anymore." Tommy's voice held a child's matter-of-fact sadness. "But he looks at you the way he used to look at Mama. Like your morning light, too." Sarah's heart stuttered. Before she could respond, Jake's boots sounded on the porch. She quickly returned the letter to its resting place, but not before the last lines burned themselves into her memory. Love isn't just warm feelings. It's a choice made new each dawn, a promise to face whatever comes together. Walt sent word, Jake said as he entered, his eyes lingering on Sarah's flushed face. The Petersons' men are in position. No sign of Clayton riders yet. Tommy bounced up, eager to share their discovery. We found Pa's love letter to Mama. Miss Sarah said it was beautiful. Jake went still, color rising in his cheeks. Sarah busied herself with the herbs, not trusting her voice. The air between them crackled with unspoken things. Son, Jake said. Gently, why don't you go check on that surprise you're making for Miss Sarah? Tommy grinned and scampered off to his room, leaving the adults in charged silence. Jake moved closer, picking up the herbal book with careful hands. Mary would read these letters when the nights got long, he said quietly. Said they reminded her that love was stronger than distance. Sarah met his eyes. She was right to keep them. Words like that deserve to be preserved. I'm not that man anymore. Jake's voice was rough. Haven't been since we buried her. No, Sarah agreed softly. You're the man who saves beaten women from fence posts, who teaches his son that kindness is strength, who risks everything to fight for what's right. She touched his hand where it rested on the book. That's a man worth knowing. Jake turned his palm up, entwining their fingers. Sarah, her name, held volumes in his voice. The first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question asked and answered in the touch of lips. The second carried more certainty, speaking of nights spent in quiet conversation, of shared laughter with Tommy, of growing trust and deeper feelings. They parted at the sound of Tommy's returning footsteps, but something fundamental had shifted. Between them, the boy burst in, proudly holding up a wooden carving. Look, I made it myself. He presented Sarah with a small, rough-hewn heart. Now you have a love letter too. Sarah gathered him close, meeting Jake's emotional gaze over there. Boy's head. It's perfect, sweetheart. I'll treasure it always. Later that evening, after Tommy was asleep, they sat together on the porch. The night was alive with cricket song and possibility. Jake's arm rested along the back of Sarah's chair, not quite touching, but promising presence. Whatever happens. With the Claytons, he said into the comfortable silence. This is real. What we're building here, you, me, Tommy, it's not just convenience or circumstance. Sarah leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his shoulder. I know. It's a choice made new each dawn. He smiled at her use of his own words. You and Mary would have liked each other. She believed love was life's best rebellion against darkness. Smart woman. Sarah touched the wooden heart in her pocket. She raised a remarkable son and found a good man to love. Found, Jake echoed, drawing her closer, like I found you, or you found us. Above them, stars wheeled in ancient patterns, witnessing love's quiet defiance of loss. Tomorrow would bring its challenges, Clayton threats, community tensions, the ongoing fight for justice. But tonight was for softer revelations, for healing hearts learning to trust again, for family forged in adversity's fire. Tommy's carved heart, far from perfect but made with pure love, symbolized their unconventional journey. Not a fairy tale, romance, but something stronger. A love built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and the kind of courage that chose hope over fear. Emma Wilson's hands trembled as she passed the document across the kitchen table. My husband found this in Judge Preston's study while fixing his window frames. The fool left it out in plain sight. Sarah stared at the paper, its official seals and flourishing signatures mocking everything she knew to be true. The date caught her eye first, 3 years ago when her father was still alive. Below it, his signature sprawled across the page, authorizing the transfer of water rights to Clayton Holdings. Except her father had been bedridden with fever that entire month. Sarah had nursed him herself. It's a forgery, Jake said quietly, studying the document over her shoulder. His presence anchored her as the implications sank in. A good one, Walt added from his position by the window, where he kept watch. good enough to hold up in court, especially with Preston behind it. Sarah traced her father's false signature. They've been planning this for years, since before Papa died. The realization made her sick. They were just waiting for the right moment. There's more. Emma pulled out another paper, a land survey map with recent markings. The judge has been documenting all the water sources in the territory. Look at the dates. They correspond exactly with Clayton land purchases. Jake's jaw tightened. They're not just after Sarah's ranch. They're trying to control the entire watershed. For the railroad. Walt's voice was grim. Survey crew came through last month. New lines coming, and whoever controls the water controls where they build. The pieces clicked into place. The escalating pressure, the strategic land grabs, the corrupted judge. The Claytons weren't just bullies. They were architects of a conspiracy that would strangle the entire region. We have to get these documents. To the territorial governor, Sarah began, but gunfire shattered the window above Walt's head. Down! Jake's body covered Sarah's as glass rained around them. Emma screamed as Walt crumpled, blood spreading across his shirt. Back door! Jake ordered, dragging Walt with surprising strength. Sarah grabbed the documents while Emma snatched up her shotgun. More shots punched through the walls. They'd been watched, followed. The Claytons had known about the judge's papers all along. They burst into the pre-dawn darkness behind Emma's house. Jake's horse and Sarah's mare waited there, along with Emma's cart. They'd planned an escape route, but not for this level of assault. Get Walt to the Wilson place, Jake told Emma as they loaded the wounded man into the cart. Sarah and I will draw them off. Tommy is safe with the Petersons, Emma finished. Go. They mounted up as riders appeared around both sides of the house. Sarah recognized James Clayton's laugh, wild and hungry in the darkness. Her mare danced beneath her, sensing danger. North, Jake said tersely, through the box canyon. They rode hard, hooves thundering in the false dawn. Behind them, Clayton voices called to each other, coordinating the pursuit. Sarah counted at least 6 riders. The box canyon was a desperate gamble, narrow, treacherous, but offering the only chance to lose their pursuers. Jake had spent days teaching Sarah its twists and hidden paths. A bullet whined past Sarah's ear. She ducked lower over her mare's neck, feeling Jake press closer to guard her flank. They'd ridden like this in happier moments, teaching each other the land's secrets, sharing quiet conversations about future hopes. Split at the fork, Jake called over the wind. You know where to meet. Sarah wanted to protest, to keep him close, but tactical sense won out. They'd planned for this, practiced it. Dividing their pursuers was their best chance. The canyon walls rose around them, steel gray in the growing light. Sarah took the left fork, while Jake went right, each path leading to different escape routes. Behind them, cursing and confusion erupted as the Clayton men tried to choose which way to follow. Sarah's mare knew this trail, taking the turns at speed, while bullets sparked off stone above them. 2 riders followed her. She recognized Edward Clayton's voice calling orders. The others must have followed Jake. Her heart clenched at the new thought, but she forced herself to focus. Jake was a skilled rider, intimately familiar with this terrain. He'd survive. He had to. The path narrowed, squeezing between sheer rock faces. Sarah's skirts snagged on brush, but Mary's sturdy sewing held. The mare's breathing was labored now, foam flecking her neck. A sharp crack split the air, not gunfire, but breaking stone. Sarah glanced up to see boulders tumbling from the canyon rim. Edward Clayton screamed as rocks crushed his horse, cutting off pursuit. She burst out of the canyon into open country, letting her mare run full out toward the rendezvous point. The sun crept over the horizon, painting the land in shades of blood and gold. The abandoned trapper's cabin appeared exactly where it should be, hidden in a grove of cottonwoods. But Jake wasn't there. Sarah dismounted, leading her exhausted. Mare behind cover. She checked her derringer, then Jake's rifle in its saddle scabbard. The documents were safe in her saddlebag, proof of corruption that could destroy the Claytons' empire, if Jake made it. Minutes stretched like years. Sarah strained to hear hoofbeats over her mare's heavy breathing, and her own thundering pulse. The sun climbed higher, burning away morning mist. A horse approached at a walk, just one moving carefully. Sarah raised the rifle, sighting down its barrel just as Jake had taught her. "It's me." Jake's voice, rough with exhaustion. "I'm hit, but it's not bad." He appeared through the trees, slumped in his saddle. Blood stained his left arm, but his eyes were clear as they met hers. "James Clayton's dead," he reported as she helped him dismount. "Tried to take a turn too fast, went over the edge. Richard took a bad fall too, but his men got him out." Sarah examined his wound, a deep graze that needed stitching, but hadn't hit anything vital. Her hands shook as she cleaned it with supplies from his saddlebag. "Walt?" Jake asked through clenched teeth. "Emma will get him to safety." Sarah tied off the bandage. "The documents prove everything, the forgery, the judge's corruption, the railroad connection. But the Claytons will know we have them now." "Good." Jake caught her hand, pressing it against his chest. "Means they'll be desperate. Desperate men make mistakes." Sarah felt his heart beating strong under her palm. "I thought, when you didn't. Arrive first." He pulled her close with his good arm, burying his face in her hair. They held each other, letting relief sweep through them. "We need to move," Jake said finally. "They'll be regrouping, searching. Have to get those documents to the governor." Sarah nodded, helping him back into the saddle. "Tommy is safe. The Petersons will protect him with their lives." His voice held absolute certainty. "We'll send word through Emma once we're clear." They rode out together, staying under tree cover. The document in Sarah's saddlebag carried the weight of justice, bought with blood and courage. James Clayton's death would change the game, Richard's calculated violence replaced by pure vengeance. But Sarah felt stronger than fear as she rode. Beside Jake, they had proof now, allies, and a clear purpose. Most importantly, they had each other, a love forged in adversity's fire, tested by violence, strengthened by shared conviction. The morning sun blazed behind them, casting their shadows far ahead on the trail to justice. The territorial marshal's badge caught the lamplight, its silver star unmarred, despite the years Marshal Daniel Green had worn it. He set it on Emma, Wilson's kitchen table next to the damning documents, his weathered face grave as he absorbed their implications. 3 years I've been trying to build a case against the Claytons, he said finally, but they're careful, never leave paper trails. He picked up the forged deed, examining it closely, until now. Sarah sat between Jake and Emma, Walt's empty chair a reminder of his absence. He was recovering at the Peterson ranch, where Tommy remained safely hidden. The marshal's arrival had been unexpected, but welcome. Emma's brother had ridden 3 days to fetch him. "James Clayton's death changes everything," Jake said quietly, his bandaged arm resting against Sarah's. "Richard won't be thinking clearly now. He'll want revenge more than railroad money." Marshal Green nodded slowly. "That works in our favor. Angry men make mistakes." He turned to Sarah. "But it also means you're in more danger than ever. Richard, Clayton won't stop until he destroys everything you love. Then we destroy him first." Sarah's voice held steel. "Legally, through proper channels. Make his own corruption bring him down. It won't be simple." The marshal lifted another document, the survey map showing the railroad's planned route. "Half the territory's big ranches are invested in this water rights scheme. Judge Preston's just the visible piece. But if we expose him," Emma interjected, "prove the forgery and his connection to the Claytons, the whole house of cards falls." The marshal's smile was grim. "I've got a circuit judge arriving next week, Harold Mackenzie. Known him 20 years, incorruptible as they come." Jake leaned forward. "The Claytons will know that too. They'll try to stop us before we can present the evidence. Which is why we need everyone." Sarah spread out Walt's map of the region. "Not just our immediate neighbors, every small rancher, every farmer who's lost land or water rights. Show them the proof. Let them see justice is possible." The marshal's eyes sparked with approval. Build an army of witnesses. Make it too big to silence or ignore. The Wilsons can host the meeting, Emma offered. Our barn's big enough, and we've got clear lines of sight in all directions. They spent hours planning, marking allies' positions, establishing communication routes. The marshal's presence lent legitimacy to their cause. His badge, a tangible symbol of the law they sought to uphold. "What about Tommy?" Jake asked as they prepared to leave. "I won't risk him. My sister's place in Helena," the marshal suggested. 2 deputies I trust will escort him. Clayton influence doesn't reach that far. Sarah touched Jake's arm, feeling his tension. "He'll understand. We'll explain it's an adventure, like in his stories." Jake caught her hand, squeezing it gratefully. The thought of separation pained them both, but Tommy's safety came first. 3 days, Marshal Green said, standing. "That's how long we need to gather everyone. Get the boy clear. Set our trap. Can you hold out? We've got safe houses scattered." "Through 4 counties, Emma assured him, and enough eyes watching the Claytons to know their every move. The marshal pinned his badge back on, its authority somehow stronger for having witnessed their plans. Richard Clayton thinks he's fighting one woman for a piece of land. Time he learned he's actually fighting an entire community for its soul. They rode out separately. The marshal south toward the circuit judge, Emma to coordinate with their allies, Jake and Sarah west to see Tommy safely off. The badge's silver gleam stayed with Sarah, a promise that justice, though delayed, was finally within reach. "You're quiet," Jake observed as they rode through pre-dawn darkness. Sarah thought of Tommy's face when they'd tell him he had to leave, of the trust their community had placed in them, of all that hung in the balance. "I'm ready for it to be over," she admitted. "Ready to build something good out of all this. Pain." Jake rode closer, his leg brushing hers. "We will. The ranch, our home, our family, we'll make it all whole again. Our family," Sarah repeated softly, the words feeling right in her mouth. The marshal's badge might represent official justice, but this, the love between them, the community rising to defend its own, the future they planned together, this was what they were truly fighting for. Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in colors of hope. The storm lantern cast a steady glow through the Wilsons' barn, its flame unwavering despite the wind that rattled the walls. Sarah watched Jake check its oil level, a habit born of years living where darkness could mean death. They'd sent Tommy to Helena that morning, his small face brave despite trembling lips. "Be strong for Miss Sarah," he'd whispered to his father, loud enough for her to hear, like thunder would be. Now, the night before their confrontation with the Claytons, that lantern's light seemed to hold all their hopes within its glass. Walls. "Papa always said a good lantern's like a good heart," Sarah mused, helping Jake lay out weapons for tomorrow's possible fight. "Steady in storms, showing others the way home." Jake paused in his work, studying her face in the warm light. "You did that for us, you know. Showed us the way home when we'd forgotten what that meant." Sarah touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble under her fingers. "We found it together." The barn door creaked, admitting Emma with fresh coffee and news. Marshall's word just came. Judge Mackenzie arrived early. He's at the county seat now. And Walt's back on his feet, organizing the South Pasture crew. She set the coffee pot near the lantern, its aromatic steam mingling with the oil lamp's familiar smell. Around them, the barn housed other lanterns, placed strategically to guide their allies through tonight's preparations. "How many confirmed?" Jake asked, accepting a cup. 43 families. Emma's voice held quiet pride. "Some rode 3 days to be here. The Claytons killed James Walker's boy last spring, made it look like a riding accident. He brought 10. Hands with him, all carrying judge's summons to testify." Sarah traced the Henderson brand on her saddle, remembering her father's lessons about community. "They thought fear would keep us isolated. They never understood that fear can burn away, leaving something stronger. Like your lantern light pushing back darkness." Emma nodded toward the flame. "One light's easy to extinguish. Many, burning together, that's harder to fight." Jake moved behind Sarah, his hand warm on her shoulder. "Tommy asked me something before he left. Said he wanted to know if you'd be his mama, proper and legal, once this was over." Sarah turned, finding his eyes serious in the lantern light. "Jake, I know the timing's wrong," he said softly, "with everything hanging on tomorrow. But some things need saying while we have the chance." Emma quietly slipped out, leaving them alone with the steady flame between them. "I lost one family to violence," Jake continued. "Watched Mary fade away because I couldn't protect her from illness. But you taught me that protecting isn't just about fighting. It's about building something worth fighting for." Sarah felt tears warm on her cheeks. "Tommy asked me to be his mama. He said you already were. Just wanted to make sure you knew it too." Jake's voice roughened. "Sarah Henderson, once this is finished, once justice is done, will you marry me? Help me raise our boy, build our home, face whatever comes together?" She answered him with a kiss that tasted of coffee and truth and tomorrow's uncertainty. When they parted, the lantern light caught the tears on both their faces. "Yes," she whispered, "to all of it. Whatever comes." A soft cough announced Emma's return. "Riders coming. Marshal Green and the circuit judge want final words before tomorrow." They straightened, gathering themselves for the work ahead. But something had shifted, become more solid. The lantern light seemed brighter somehow, reflecting off windows, like distant stars come down to earth. "I'll trim all the wicks," Emma said, practical as always. "We'll need clear light for the judge's papers, and signals need to be seen for miles." Sarah squeezed Jake's hand once more before they parted to their tasks. Tomorrow would bring its own storms: Clayton violence, corrupt officials, the weight of justice seeking balance. But tonight, surrounded by lantern light and love's quiet certainty, she felt ready. The wind rose outside, carrying winter's first hint of snow. Inside, the flame burned steady, lighting the way home. The courthouse doors stood 12 feet high, solid oak worn smooth by decades of hands seeking justice. Sarah faced them now, Jake beside her, as morning sun painted their weathered surface gold. Behind those doors waited Judge Mackenzie, Marshal Green, and the proof that would break Clayton power forever. Before them stretched the town's main street, eerily empty, save for their allies positioned strategically in doorways and behind wagons. Walt's rifle barrel gleamed from the general store's upper window. Emma Wilson sat her horse at the livery, shotgun across her lap, watching the South Road. "Richard Clayton's coming," Jake said quietly. 6 riders with him. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of her father's water rights deed, the real one, in her pocket. Judge Preston, already inside, looking considerably less comfortable than usual. Jake's smile held no humor. Amazing what a circuit judge's presence does to a corrupt man's confidence. The approaching riders materialized from the morning mist like dark specters. Richard Clayton led them, his usual elegant composure shattered by grief and rage over James's death. His remaining brother Edward rode beside him, arms still bandaged from the canyon fight. "Last chance to walk away, Miss Henderson." Richard's voice carried clearly across the empty street. "Those doors can stay closed. No one else needs to die. They're already open." Sarah stepped forward, her voice steady. "And everything that's happened, James, the forgeries, the railroad deal, it all comes to light today." "Light?" Richard's laugh was ugly. "The only light you'll see is gunfire. You really think these doors will protect you? That law means anything out here?" As if on cue, the courthouse doors swung wide. Marshal Green stood framed in the entrance, badge catching. The sun. Behind him, Judge Mackenzie's stern face surveyed the scene. "The law means everything, Mr. Clayton." The circuit judge's voice rang with authority. "Or did you think we wouldn't discover your arrangement with Judge Preston, the forged deeds, the railroad conspiracy?" Richard Clayton's face went slack, with shock, before twisting into fury. His hand dropped to his gun, but Walt's warning shot kicked up dust at his horse's feet. "Think carefully," Marshal Green called. "You're surrounded by 43 families you've wronged. all legally summoned as witnesses, all carrying sworn statements about your crimes. Edward Clayton wheeled his horse, seeing armed ranchers emerging from every doorway, every alley. The ambush they'd planned had become their trap instead. "It's over, Richard." Sarah climbed the courthouse steps, Jake close behind. "Face justice with whatever dignity you have left." "Justice?" Richard spat the word. "You killed my brother." "Your brother died trying to murder us," Jake responded evenly. "After beating a woman and leaving her to die. Those are the facts the judge will hear." Something broke in Richard Clayton's face. He drew his gun with lightning speed, but Sarah was faster. The derringer Jake had taught her to use barked once, sending Clayton's weapon spinning away. "Inside! Now!" Marshal Green's order cut through the chaos as Clayton's men reached for their guns. Rifles and shotguns bristled from every window, every covered position. The odds were overwhelming. Jake shielded Sarah through the courthouse doors as gunfire erupted briefly outside. When it stopped, Marshal Green's voice rose again. "Drop your weapons, all of you." The doors stood open now, justice's threshold crossed. Inside, Judge Preston huddled in a corner, his face ashen as Judge Mackenzie examined the evidence of his corruption. Sarah laid her father's true deed on the court. Clerk's desk, beside the forged document that had started everything. "Your brother's death was on you, Richard," she said, as Marshall's deputies led the Clayton brothers in, disarmed and defeated. "Just like every other death you've caused. But it ends here, in front of these witnesses, under true law." Richard. Clayton said nothing, but his eyes promised vengeance. Sarah met his gaze steadily, Jake's solid presence beside her making her stronger. Judge Mackenzie cleared his throat. "This court is now in session. We will hear testimony regarding water rights fraud, corruption of judicial authority, conspiracy to impede railroad legislation, and multiple counts of violent crime, including attempted murder." The courthouse doors stood wide, letting in light and air and justice. Through them Sarah could see her allies, now friends, standing guard. Each face represented a family the Claytons had wronged, each presence a testament to communities. Power over tyranny. "Ready?" Jake asked softly as the judge began calling witnesses. Sarah squeezed his hand. "Ready to build something new." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, warming the courthouse doors that had finally opened to truth. Mary's wedding ring caught the afternoon light as Jake held it out to Sarah, its simple gold band reflecting more than just sunlight. They stood in the churchyard after the verdicts, surrounded by their community, while autumn winds carried the sound of celebration from the town square. "She would have wanted you to have it," Jake said softly, "to make our family whole." Sarah touched the ring with trembling fingers, remembering the first time she'd seen it in that velvet pouch, back when she was still healing in their cabin. Now it represented not just past love honored, but future love promised. The Claytons. "We'll hang," Walt announced, approaching with Emma Wilson. His limp was still pronounced, but healing like everything else. Judge Mackenzie just pronounced sentence. Richard, Edward, and 3 of their main collaborators. "And Judge Preston?" Sarah asked, though she already knew. They'd all watched his testimony crumble under the circuit judge's relentless questioning. 20 years hard labor, Emma confirmed, along with seizure of all properties gained through fraud. The governors already signed the orders restoring water rights to their rightful owners. The ring in Jake's hand seemed to pulse with possibilities. Behind them, the church bell rang, marking the hour and something more. The end of Clayton tyranny, the triumph of justice over corruption, love's quiet victory over hate. "Tommy Stage arrives tomorrow," Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. "Our boy's coming home." Sarah felt tears warm on her cheeks. "Our boy, our home, our future." She held out her hand, letting Jake slip the ring onto her finger. It fit, as if it had been made for this moment. "Miss Sarah Pa!" Tommy's voice startled them all. He burst through the churchyard gate, Marshal Green following more sedately on horseback. "Couldn't keep him in Helena once he heard the news," the marshal explained, smiling. Figured it was safe enough to bring him home early. Sarah caught Tommy in her arms as he launched himself at her, his familiar weight settling against her heart. Jake enfolded them both, and for a moment the world narrowed to just their small family. "Did you win?" Tommy asked eagerly. "Did the bad men learn their lesson like in my stories?" "Justice won," Jake corrected gently, "because brave people stood together." Tommy noticed the ring then, his eyes widening. "Does this mean—" "Yes, sweetheart." Sarah kissed his forehead. "If you still want me for your mama." His answering squeeze nearly knocked the breath from her. Over his head, she met Jake's gaze, seeing all their tomorrows reflected there. The marshal cleared his throat. "Town's planning quite a celebration. Governor's even riding out himself next week to oversee the property restorations. But I reckon you folks might prefer a quieter victory." Emma stepped forward. "Reverend's free now if you don't want to wait. Walt and I could witness." Sarah looked at Jake, questioning. He smiled, touching the ring on her finger. "Time to make it official," he said softly, "unless you want a bigger ceremony. We've had enough big moments." Sarah hugged Tommy closer. "I just want to start our life together." The small church welcomed them with afternoon light streaming through its windows. Tommy stood proud beside his father, while Sarah and Jake spoke their vows, Emma sniffling happily in the background. The ring that had symbolized past love now shone with new promises, new dreams. "Family ain't just blood," Walt observed at the simple supper Emma hosted afterward. "It's choice and courage and standing together when storms come." Sarah touched her ring, watching Jake teach Tommy a new wooden horse's name. Around them, their closest friends raised glasses to love's persistence, to justice served, to community preserved. Later, they rode together toward home, their home now truly and legally. The Henderson ranch would keep its name, but it would shelter 3 hearts instead of 1. The evening star rose ahead of them, bright as hope. "Tell me a story." "Mama?" Tommy asked from his perch in front of Jake's saddle. Sarah smiled, the new title warming her heart. "Once there was a brave wooden horse named Thunder who helped a princess and a knight find their way home." Jake reached across the space between their horses, taking her hand. The ring caught starlight, marking all the changes that love could bring. Healing wounds, bridging losses, building futures from broken pieces. Behind them lay the conquered darkness of Clayton corruption. Ahead stretched all their bright tomorrows, waiting to be lived. The traveling photographer adjusted his camera one final time, the Henderson ranch house standing proud behind the family of 3. Sarah smoothed Tommy's collar while Jake straightened his tie, both of them fussing in the way of parents everywhere. "Now then," the photographer said from beneath his black cloth, "let's capture this moment for posterity." Sarah settled into the chair they'd brought out to the porch, the same chair where she'd spent healing days, learning to trust again. Jake stood behind her, one hand resting on her shoulder where Mary's ring caught the morning light. Tommy stood between them, clutching his beloved Thunder, insisting the wooden horse deserved to be in the family portrait too. Spring roses bloomed in what had once been Mary's garden, now tended by Sarah's careful hands. The herb patch beside it thrived, mixing memory and future in its green abundance. Even the ranch itself seemed to glow with renewed purpose, its fences mended, its waters flowing clear and sure. "Hold still now," the photographer instructed, but Sarah was already frozen in the perfection of this moment. Through the camera's lens, no one could see the scars beneath her sleeves from the ropes that had once bound her. They couldn't see the nightmares that still sometimes woke Jake, sending him to check doors and windows before returning to hold her close. The portrait wouldn't show Tommy's occasional quiet questions about the bad men who had tried to hurt his new mama, but it would capture this, their joined hands, their forward-facing smiles, the peace they'd built from chaos. The flash powder popped and smoked. Tommy giggled, breaking his pose to bury his face in Sarah's skirts. Jake's laugh joined his, deep and free, while Sarah gathered her son close. Later, after the photographer had gone, they sat together on the porch steps, watching sunset paint the mountains gold. The same mountains that had witnessed Sarah's near death now blessed her resurrection into joy. "Did you ever think," Jake asked softly, "that morning at the fence post, that things could end like this?" Sarah leaned against him, Tommy drowsing, in her lap. "Not an ending," she corrected. "A beginning." Thunder, the wooden horse, stood sentinel on the porch rail, his carved eyes watching over the land that had seen so much change. Below, in the valley, new settlers were building homes on restored properties. The governor's justice had given many families fresh starts. "Tell me a story, Mama?" Tommy mumbled sleepily. "About how we became a family." Sarah kissed his forehead, meeting Jake's tender gaze above their son's head. "Once there was a brave girl and a kind man, and the sweetest boy in all of Montana Territory. And though dark times came to test them, love proved stronger than any shadow." The story wrapped around them like a warm blanket as night crept in. Soon the photographer's portrait would hang beside Mary's picture in their living room, not replacing the past, but building on its foundation. Two kinds of love, equally true, equally blessed. Their family portrait would show three people and a wooden horse, but it would capture something more: the triumph of hope over fear, of community over corruption, of love over loss. A new chapter, written in light.